Hello, security enthusiasts and tech trailblazers. Welcome to NextGen 2025. I'm Deep Gupta, your guide for today's adventure into the future of security. We're about to explore how remote pilots and autonomous drones are redefining patrols and response mechanisms. So, buckle up, it's going to be an exhilarating ride. Before we dive in, let me introduce our esteemed speaker. Joining us is Ryan Smith, the visionary founder and president of Titan Protection. With over 20 years in law enforcement, Ryan witnessed firsthand the challenges of traditional security measures. Determined to make a change, he founded Titan Protection to deliver top notch security solutions that blend human expertise with cutting edge technology. Under his leadership, Titan has become a pioneer in integrating drone technology into security protocols, offering innovative and cost effective services. Now, to ensure a smooth session, here are a few pointers. You can engage with us. If you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box anytime. We'll address them during the Q&A segment. Session recording. If you can't take your notes fast enough, no worries. This session is being recorded and will be available for you to revisit. And capture your favorite moments and share them on social media with the hashtag NextGen2025. Who knows, you might win a surprise. Now, let's set the stage. Imagine a security system where drones autonomously patrol your premises, responding to incidents in real time, all overseen by skilled remote pilots. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, it's today's reality, thanks to innovators like Ryan Smith. Ryan, could you kick things off by sharing how Titan Protection is leveraging drone technology to enhance security operations?
Absolutely. All right, let's get started here. You able to see the screen there?
Yep, I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to the entire Flightbase team. Presenting this, got a peek behind the curtain and saw the amount of work that goes into this. So certainly appreciate the entire Flightbase team and humbled to be here. Good morning to everybody. And I say good morning here in Kansas City, but I know many are spread out throughout the world. And it's another thing that makes this event quite unique, from different time zones, different parts of the world. So appreciate everybody joining in. And yes, today we are talking drones and physical security. These are two passions of mine and have been very fortunate in my professional career to put these two things together. I have been flying single engine piston planes since I was 14 years old. And also from a professional standpoint, had always had aspirations of law enforcement and became a security officer when I was 18. Worked in that capacity through college and then went into the police academy when I was 22. So I've been in law enforcement and security ever since, and continued to, enjoy aviation and have been flying drones since 2012 and really trying to figure out how to put these things together in a security aspect ever since then. So my goal today and my hope is to share what I've learned along the way. Titan Protection as a company, we are based in Kansas City, Missouri, right in the center of the United States, and have grown. I started the company in 2008 with a focus on physical security, but more specifically blending security officers with technology and blending highly trained security officers at that. But our company is about 600 employees. We have a video monitoring center where we monitor several thousand cameras across the country. And that is what we call remote guarding. And we blend that with the physical perspective. So fits right into what we're talking about today with drones and how we put all of that together. Remote assets and anything outdoors is kind of what we protect and what we specialize in. So that lends itself very well to drones and blending security. So when we're talking about drones and security, they perform primarily two functions. We are patrolling, looking for some type of activity that may need response or need action, or the drone is triggered or responding to a triggering event, which may be, most cases it's technology driven. It's a camera, a photo beam, a radar perimeter detection system. it could also come in the form of a call for service from security personnel, from, a member of the public. But typically when we're talking about these response capabilities, they're typically triggered by some sort of technology. So when we talk about autonomy as well, we're specifically talking about what levels of autonomy, and that can vary, right? Because we want the drone to deploy autonomously, patrol autonomously, but we still have a human in the loop for many reasons. One, currently we have one drone pilot to one drone. We anticipate that will obviously increase to a one to many, eventually none to many. But even in the none to many scenario, we still feel it's important to have a human in the loop. One, for who's going to respond and take action once the drone detects something, but also in an emergency capability. So that's kind of the role that we fill and what we focus on as remote pilots. But as far as autonomous response and patrol, there's kind of some bullet points there that detail what's involved in that and what's the capabilities. Can be manually overridden if needed. We want the drone to operate as autonomously as possible, but it is sometimes needed where if they see something, maybe an operator needs to pause the mission, take manual control, investigate something in more depth, and then certainly if there's some sort of emergency issue or loss of communication or GPS, the pilot can take control. So that's a breakdown basically of the two functions when we're talking about this in physical security. When we are talking about this, some of the benefits and some of the things we see are clearly a response time increase, availability for the drone to respond and patrol very quickly. Another great use case is accessibility to areas that are difficult to get cameras to, or for human officers to patrol. Very good opportunity for the drone. Large areas are certainly someplace that the drone shines, but also, and I think that it can sometimes be thought of you must have a large area for the drone to be a viable option, and I would disagree. I certainly think that that's an area where it excels, but I don't think it's limited to, maybe a car dealership or, other properties that aren't necessarily large, but you could make a case for it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in more detail. So when we are talking about use cases, property management, multifamily, car dealerships, transportation, and outdoor assets really encompasses anything that we're trying to protect that's outdoors, and that can be equipment, people, cars, parking lots, those types of things. So basically, we're talking anything outdoors, construction sites, critical infrastructure. These are also areas that lend themselves favorably to a drone application. And we're also seeing kind of blend uses for this, right? We might have a construction site that wants to use the drone for security measures at night, and then operationally during the day, we can perform all sorts of functions, equipment monitoring, grading for soil, project management. And that is a really good use case, and especially allows for different budgets to get involved, right? We can use the security budget for the nighttime security, the operational budget during the day, and can kind of help open up some budgets and lend itself to these types of applications. But so not just a security, it may be the primary function, and it may be in addition to some of these others. Some of the numbers that we're seeing that I think are important, 30-40% reduction in security incidents, and that's the overall goal, right? From our perspective, intervention, deterrence is the ultimate goal. We want this to deter. We want to be fire prevention, not firefighting, whenever we can. So seeing those types of numbers is certainly very positive. Response times being a key indicator, and one that we're seeing a lot of success with. And then the big one is the cost savings over traditional security. And beyond the cost, even arguing effectiveness and how we're patrolling and responding to incidents on a property. But just to kind of paint this picture from a cost perspective, traditional security officers, looking at the typical use case where maybe somebody has a security officer overnight in areas where nobody should be, and that's another important point that this is really helpful and really useful in areas where nobody should be, because the mere presence of a person could dictate suspicious activity or action needed. But so in this scenario, I'm showing we've got 84 hours a week, which is basically 12 hours, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Say an 8 p.m. to an 8 a.m. type of thing, we're looking at $13,000 a month, as compared to the drone security package at $6,100 a month, around a 60% cost savings. And in this example, what we are using is a mile perimeter, and in this case, it's a radar system that puts a mile perimeter around the property. Anytime that's breached, the drone then goes and investigates. So it takes that, and you could make the argument or look, and sometimes people will say, well, you're cannibalizing your security officer business by implementing this technology. And I'm a very firm believer in blending the two and getting the most cost-effective and the most effective security means that are out there. So, the traditional security officer that may be out there for 12 hours a night, how often are they patrolling? How alert? Are they able to see different areas of the property where for over half the cost, we can get a virtual perimeter around this property and then be able to know when somebody or something goes inside of it and then go and investigate that. On top of that, that's including 3 preventative patrols, flying around the property looking for suspicious activity. Maybe this is used during the day when there's activity on the property, good preventative patrol looking for suspicious activity, and then at night we're using the detection equipment. So just from a cost perspective, painting the picture of the difference between the two. And one of the exciting things about right now is a lot of these pieces are coming together. When I've been following this for the past decade, we needed certain things to make this a reality, and now we're seeing that come into play. Those being very simply 2 main things. We needed a viable means of beyond visual line of sight. Right now, drone piloting is the FAA requires that the pilot have visual line of sight while it operates the drone. For us, that takes away the autonomy or the cost savings, the ROI of removing the person from the scene. And then the other thing we needed were docking stations to launch, land the drone, as well as charge. If we had to have a person on the ground, and really nobody was making docking stations until recently, because without beyond visual line of sight, the docking station was not needed. If a person had to be there to pilot the drone, they could launch, land, change batteries, and a docking station wasn't needed. So as we're seeing beyond visual line of sight come together, we're now seeing the proliferation of docks, which is sparking a bunch of use cases, but primarily, we needed these 2 things for this to be a reality in the security space, and very exciting that we're finally here. We received last year, we're the first security company to receive a nationwide beyond visual line of sight waiver, which allows us to scale this much more rapidly. The waiver process has existed for a while, but for us to scale this with customers, it was challenging to go site by site, get a waiver, expense, time, everything else that was involved. So with that out of the way, and now docking stations, this is a reality and something that's here today, and is very exciting to see and use, and especially after all the years of waiting. But so with those things together, and now the pieces are in place, you're thinking about maybe putting a drone program together for physical security. And we'll recap here kind of what is involved with that and what types of things you should be thinking about when putting a program like this together. The big one that comes to play on everybody's mind is compliance and regulatory. What are the laws that govern drone flights? Talked a little bit earlier about Part 107 currently requiring visual line of sight. That's how pilots are getting licensed under that rule. We are hopeful that soon that's changing to Part 108, which will govern remote piloting, and we're hopefully getting the notice of proposed rulemaking, and that's becoming a reality, although it seems that by the time that comes to a notice of proposed rulemaking, we'll still have about another 18 to 24 months for that to work its way through the regulatory process and become law. Until then, we're governed by the waiver process, and it seems like we will be, at least in the near future. Beyond that, then we're, the consideration is pilot training and licensing. making sure pilots, pass their tests, stay current on training, licensing. This can become a challenge, especially we've seen a lot of customers who may rely on the guard force to be their visual observers on the ground. They get them licensed as pilots maybe, and then we're seeing turnover, and how do you manage, okay, Dave was our drone pilot, now Dave's gone, who's handling this? That rolls into fleet management. Part of our waiver dictates or mandates that we maintain according to the manufacturer's guidelines for maintenance. So if that stipulates that propellers are changed every 100 hours or batteries are swapped out or different pieces of that, there's got to be a robust way to track that. That gets into record keeping and in ways that you're following that becomes important, especially as you're expanding the fleet. And then privacy being another consideration. When we first started talking to insurance carriers about policies on our drones, I kind of thought that they were going to be most concerned with the drone falling out of the air, hitting somebody on the ground. And really what their main concern is how are we storing images? How are we training, auditing, ensuring that our operators aren't zooming into the apartment complex across the street and looking at a window or those types of things. So a consideration for sure when we lump that into compliance and regulatory. And then you've got a remote pilot operations center. And so, one of the ARC recommendations, or they put out the recommendations for beyond visual line of sight, one of the things I didn't see was any sort of reference towards redundant internet and power backups. Our monitoring center is UL listed. We have a power generator. We go through testing and all sorts of things. And I think the worry or the concern there is what happens if you've got a drone or multiple drones in the air, you lose power. These are things to think through, as well as shift coverage, making sure that licensed pilots are always on. What's the contingency if somebody calls in sick? What's the backup plan? Privacy, record keeping, certainly. And then software management. That's a big one, and one that we lean on and use and see a lot of value in the flight-based operation is, how do you get one pane of glass where you're operating all of this? And then more importantly, when you're talking about response and detection systems, how do you tie that all into one piece? And so software software can go into record keeping, but primarily mission planning. How are we operating these drones? And then computer and phone management systems. Certainly something to consider. And I would say that going from no operations center to remote pilot is a bigger leap than going from maybe you have a remote operations or a security operations set up and you're thinking about introducing pilots into that. I think those are very different lifts in the sense of standing up a program. And then we're talking about challenges and limitations. And these are things I think to go eyes wide open to when we're thinking about this from a security measure or just a drone program in general. There will be times when the drone is unable to fly. Wind resistance, I see a lot of manufacturers will say the drone can fly in 40-mile-an-hour winds, and then somewhere you might see, but it can only land in the docking station in 20-mile-an-hour wind. So if we're using a dock or we're deploying these things remotely, really look at, and the dock seems simple. And I was one that thought, what's so hard? You just make a dock. It's a box that opens up and goes up and down. But the key and the challenge with that is precision landing. How do you get a drone to land in the exact spot that's going to match up where it needs to charge? And then also while it's battling wind and different considerations like that. So when you're looking at endurance on a drone, I'd really keep in mind or look at what is the wind resistance that it can land in. Endurance factors for flight times, that becomes impactful. Most of the missions we're seeing are 10 minutes or less or around that. Depends on the size of the property and the complexity of the mission. But most of the time, you'll have plenty of endurance to fly. The real consideration is how often you want to fly it. If you want it to fly every 30 minutes, then be considerate of how much time it needs to be in the dock to charge. Backup power systems being another one to consider. And then the NDAA compliance, that could be a whole nother session, and I certainly won't, dive into all of that, but it is definitely a consideration when you're picking and thinking about drones and which ones to deploy. We have critical infrastructure customers that, are sensitive and need an NDAA compliant. We have other customers that may not be that high up on the list. Another reason, another great partnership with Flightbase, we use the AIR device, the artificial intelligence appliance that will help and add people and vehicle tracking and detection as the drone's patrolling. But the other aspect is it sits in between, or can sit in between, in the on-prem solution, the dock, the network, and provide some pretty robust cybersecurity measures. So these are all things to consider, and definitely that one is one I won't go into great detail on, but certainly a very big conversation to have if you're thinking about using or flying drones. And then additionally, we want to look at these things. Is this the main security component, or is it one layer of many? And I think the argument could be made for any of the above, although the application, budgets, threat picture, those types of things are going to dictate how much security you need. But I think the point I wanted to make here was be eyes wide open to the gaps. If we know that wind is not, or that the drone is not going to be able to operate in 25-mile-an-hour winds, then we need to be eyes wide open to that and know, okay, are we comfortable with the gap when it happens, or do we need to backfill that somehow with security patrols, personnel, other security means? So something to think through for sure. Last mile, we in remote guarding use technology to, do the heavy lifting, go through the haystack, find the needle, raise it to us, but then there's still that last mile. Somebody needs to pick that up and take it to the finish line, and we need to know who that is. Is that going to be the client, the personnel? Is that going to be the police? Is that going to be audio intervention, something very powerful we use? Speakers on a property, we call somebody out by clothing, hey, you in the red shirt, leave immediately or be arrested, police are on the way. So we need to think that response piece the drone can do very well, but there is that last mile that needs to be addressed somehow and talked through, as well as contingency plans, disaster, that type of thing. Big consideration here, when you're thinking about a program like this is, do you do it yourself, or do you outsource to a provider like us that does it? And kind of listing the differences here. And I think this is application specific. And I think what we're talking about is headaches, liability, and cost. And, is there a use case to bring all three of those in-house, or is there a value in outsourcing that? And so kind of on the left in the DIY section, you kind of see some of the costs, although I think this is light on the cost. I mean, just looking at the UL certification, I know, the initial certification was somewhere around $10,000, $15,000, but then you have all the pieces on the back end that you need to comply with that. We had a $150,000 power generator. We had to redo some processes, some locks, some different things. So I would say I think some of these costs are low, but considerations. And then as the drone as a service option, this is something that the customer pays one monthly payment. All of these things are included. And then now you're shifting the liability, you're shifting the headaches, and you're reducing the cost greatly by doing so. So definitely something to consider, to think through. I think there's use cases for both. And just as a cost comparison, I think you're well over $1 million if you're looking at a 3-year cost comparison or cost for an in-house program. And then using that example that we had before, just comparing drone as a service, you're a fraction of that cost. So definitely some things to consider. And that was a very high level overview of security and drone program. We certainly go deeper on several things. We did put a white paper together. I'll leave this up for just a second before we open this up to questions. But feel free if you're interested in diving deeper or want any of those topics more. We do put that in a bit more detail through that white paper there. And Deep, with that, I'm through my slides and ready for some Q&A if you have any.
Sure. Thank you so much for, the informative session, Ryan. That was really amazing to see how you are, helping people out and helping different companies, businesses and enterprises for, providing the service with a remote operation center. So we have quite a few questions from people around. So I'll just start with a question from Alexander. And he mentions, he asked basically, can you explain a practical scenario wherein, this comes in very handy? Like, let's say an alarm rings up and then you send a drone. Like, can you like explain a practical situation? And
Sure.
then also to add to that question, do you think this service will complement to the security guards, the current personnel on ground, or will it replace them? So, what are your thoughts on that?
So to the second question, I will say that's application specific and would depend on a bunch of factors: the size of the property, the threat picture, what type of thing, what are the expectations. If we are looking at simply, we've got an area where nobody should be, and we want a means to detect that and patrol that, I think you could make a case for replacing the security force. But again, I think that when we talk about remote guarding, we really look at the detection and the response. And maybe we filter in some patrols with physical security officers where they're stopping in, checking locks, visibly deterring, seeing, maybe escorting employees as needed. But then more importantly, just having somebody available to respond. If we remove the guard force and we have that last mile, I really truly think that the blend of the two is the key to success. On the first point, a use case example, the one that pops to mind right now, or top of mind is transportation. If you can picture a fenced lot where you're keeping semi trucks, those semi trucks are backed in where the back end is against the fence line. So we can use fixed cameras, and we do. We monitor anytime there's a detection, it pops up in our monitoring center, and we can take action from there. The challenge in transportation is the thieves come from behind the fence, they cut through the fence, and they're right into the back of the semi trucks, and they can hit several, and they can go undetected because maybe the camera is on the building looking out towards the fence line, the trailer's obstructing it. Then you get into the complexity of cost of power, internet to put a camera on the fence line or perimeter. And so you may be able to use mobile units, solar units, and kind of get bits and pieces of the property. Whereas now in the drone model with the detection as the response part of the autonomous response and patrol, we can put the virtual perimeter around the fence. Now, anytime somebody breaches that, the drone investigates, and so we get a more holistic protection of the property. We're not just relying on the security officer to patrol and maybe catch them when they're on the other side. It turns it into a very holistic means of protection that gets the entire property. And by the way, at a fraction of the cost of the other traditional measures that have some gaps in them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Ryan. So I think we'll be able to take one more question as of now because we have to wrap up the session in the next 2 minutes. So Ryan, how do you think AI, like the AI which is coming up right now, how will it transform as in the drone industry? How are you planning to use it with your practices as well?
So even though I believe very heavily in the human in the loop, and I think that is always going to be a piece of the puzzle, from a operational standpoint, we want operators only involved with actual incidents. So we want the technology to do the heavy lifting, to go through the haystack, find the needle, and raise it up. So that's where artificial intelligence comes into play. And I've been involved with video analytics since 2008, and it's been interesting to see how far that's come, and to now see it done on a moving scene, right? Because video analytics can recognize pixels and do all sorts of different things, but then you introduce a moving scene into it, and seeing how well that works. And for our standpoint, like I said, eventually we want to go to none to many, where the drones are flying around and then only telling us when there's an issue. So artificial intelligence and autonomy is certainly crucial for our business and our mission.
Understood. So I think we have one more good question. So are there any payloads that you're currently using with your drones, like searchlights, spotlights, and what are your plans on using them?
Great question. So as I mentioned earlier, the audio intervention is something that's super powerful, and we've seen payloads where you're having lights and you're having speakers on them. And I may be wrong, but I haven't seen any yet that fit in a dock. And that's where, for us, I think becomes important and a game changer, because I think that adds all sorts of capabilities that make this, the lights and the speakers specifically. Right now, what we're doing is we're still putting the speakers up on the property. So maybe it's not on the drone, but you put a 120 decibel speaker on the property. or in strategic locations, we can still get that audio of intervention. But that's going to be a layer that greatly increases our capabilities as it's able to be encompassed in the dock.
Understood. So, yeah, I think we are, past our time, Ryan. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you to the audience for, engaging with us and your questions. So everyone, stay vigilant, stay innovative, and enjoy the rest of NextGen 2025. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Appreciate it.